I would like to express my gratitude to all the contributors of such an organization. And it's very nice to be here. And I'd like to thank previous speakers and colleagues for their quite fruitful contributions to the topic of human security concept. So I will now present the joint work of mine and Assistant Professor Murat Necip Arman. And since we have already mentioned theoretical dimension of human security concept and how United Nations have been involved in this issue, I will not make repetitive comments, so I will just keep it direct and just pass through the case studies of how European Union as a provider of human security works. So just to remember what we talked in the previous sessions, violence is defined as insult against basic needs and life of a person, and we know that broadening of referent objects of security can be defined as horizontal extension of security, while diversification of actors as security provider is a vertical extension. So we know that human security is dealt with a wide spectrum, stretching from physical security of individuals and exposed to interstate political violence to political psychological well-being in their daily lives. So we also mentioned in the United Nations Development Report, human security means freedom from want and freedom from fear. And these are the threats. So, why human security as a basic concept? OALS states that for defining human security as a basic security concept, especially since 1990s, the three factors below played quite an influential role. Interstate tensions and clashes and disintegration of state organs, and secondly, supranational and cross-border qualities of current threats and communication revolution. In the post-Cold War era, the axis of armed conflict took a new direction into the states beyond the borders of them, which was quite rare previously. During this period, micronationalism and religious extremism filled in the power vacuum led by the collapse of socialist bloc. Among the basic indicators of this dynamic, the solution of Yugoslavia and ethnic religious conflicts in Africa can be counted. Another indicator is that there has been a steep rise in asymmetric threats since 1990s. Conflicts involving terrorist organizations and paramilitary actors fighting against regular military units of states started to become widespread as opposed to symmetric wars that armies fought. Lastly, with internet technology being more and more prevalent, new conflict models in asymmetric wars has been started to emerge. Not only a conflict, a disaster, an epidemic, or an economic crisis breaking out in any part of the world spread over more quickly, but also they are heard by a larger amount of people in a lesser time than ever. Along with states, as a basic security providers of human security, international organizations and INGOs are defined as supportive actors or force multipliers. IMF, World Bank, or humanitarian aid organizations are among the supportive human security providers. Nevertheless, since that the activities of the civilian-led organizations are most of the time not more than monitoring, observing, reporting, or just building perception is widely accepted idea, the activities of these organizations have a limited influence. So, European Union as a non-state human security provider has a distinguished role. Yes. So to what extent EU has influence over providing human security on a wider area covered by European neighborhood policy? Especially after the declaration of Petersburg tasks, EU has increased its efforts to identify itself as a human security provider in its region. Originally, the emerging task competence conflict between NATO and EU in the 1990s is among the underlying factors of this effort. Declaring Petersburg tasks, EU, short of providing security beyond NATO's capacity and power, signaled that it would be authorized over issues encompassed by human security. Of course, the immediate cause of this declaration was the need to find effective conflict resolution techniques that would be implemented on humanitarian disasters occurring in Western Balkans. The experience of Western Balkans can of course be a measure of to what extent these conflict resolution techniques, which were started with Petersburg tasks in effort to create common foreign and security policy, are successful. In so much as that Kosovo and Bosnia cases had a success is to some extent acceptable. However, the research question of this work is the influence of EU over providing human security on a wider area covered by European neighborhood policy. And the another strategic importance of EU about human security is the magnitude of capacity and power on her hands. The table on this slide shows that in 2014, EU allocates almost 2.200 million euros of its budget on security and citizenship. And according to these data, the budget of CFSP is 314 million euros. Furthermore, the budget of European Neighborhood Instrument is among the significant data. The European Neighborhood Policy covers 16 partners to the east and south of the EU's borders, namely Algeria, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Belarus, Egypt, Georgia, Israel, Jordan, Lebanon, Libya, and Republic of Moldova, Morocco, the occupied Palestinian territory, Syria, Tunisia, and Ukraine. The proposed budget for the new European Neighborhood Instrument is 18.2 billion euros for the period of 2014 and 2020. And in addition to this quantitative data, the four of the 28 members of EU, which are Germany, United Kingdom, France, and Italy, being the members of G8, and that 22 of them, being NATO members, are quite sound indicators of the fact that EU has qualitatively an advantageous position for providing human security as well. So now, as a provider of human security, we can talk about European Union. There are studies that classify EU's policies against West Balkans in 1990s as embryonic human security policies. However, it's been a widely accepted approach that human security concept was mentioned in EU literature for the first time in the report, as we already mentioned in the previous sessions, A Human Security Doctrine for Europe. This report suggested the formation of Human Security Response Force, which would include military units as well as civilian experts that would be suited to carry out human security operations. Even though a Human Security Response Force proposed with the doctrine was never founded, it's obvious that these propositions have been given importance on EU's rhetoric on foreign policy and security policy since the declaration of the doctrine. A study of Mr. Arman, which finds out that the concepts pertaining to human security rhetoric were mentioned in the official documents of European Neighborhood Policy, which was declared with the paper on wider Europe neighborhood, a new framework for our relations with the eastern and southern neighbors on March 2003, and that the action plans of European Neighborhood Policy were prepared based upon aforementioned doctrine, has been published in the Journal of International Relations in 2012. Furthermore, Mary Kaldor, Mary Martin, and Sabine Selchow found out that human security concept creates the basis of a both discursive and linguistic shift on EU's operating principles. In addition to those findings, Marlene Gottwald, with discursive analysis, concluded that the Libyan crisis, EU's official rhetoric, is completely in harmony with human security perspective. So one can find references to human security in many official documents belonging to EU in the following years as well. For an example, a policy paper prepared by the Finnish presidency in May 2006 examined the status of human security as one of the several dimensions of the EU regional approach. So, what's expected from EU, which claims that it set human security as a main approach, is that as a human security provider, it should adopt more proactive attitudes against conflicts in its immediate area. What's meant here is not that EU should identify itself as a military actor that conduct humanitarian interventions. Rather that it should adopt a proactive attitude such as effective diplomatic initiatives on main conflict areas and ending armed conflicts, organizing aid campaigns, developing influential measures for problems of refugees, and mobilization of international society's interest on important topics. Now there is an evaluation of EU's expected proactive attitude on two different cases, which I mentioned before, the Syrian crisis, which happened in 2010, and the Ukrainian crisis, a recent one in 2014. First, the Syrian crisis, and as you can see, European Commission says that the Syrian crisis is the world's largest humanitarian and security disaster, led by especially the invasion of Iraq in 2003 and the Arab Spring in 2010. As the Arab Spring caused governmental changes in Tunisia, Libya, and Egypt, opposing groups in Syria founded a coalition, Free Syrian Army, and started armed resistance to topple Assad regime. Nonetheless, taking the advantage of lack of control in the region, jihadist groups moved to Syria from various parts of the world and caused quite a chaotic situation to prevail. As a result of these developments, many ethnic and religious minorities in the region have been faced with the threat of genocide. It's reported that since the first death during anti-governmental protests in Syria occurred on March 18, 2011, almost 170,000 Syrians had lost their lives. Over 2.5 million people had to move to other countries, and almost 3 million buildings had either collapsed or heavily damaged. So according to the updated statistical analysis of documentation of killings in the Syrian Arab Republic, report commissioned by the Office of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, consisting of Megan Price, Anita Goetz, and Patrick Ball, when we look at the sex of the victims, of the 191,369 documented killings in this report, 85.1% are male, 9.3% are female, and 5.6% of records do not indicate the sex of the victim. When we look at the age of the victims, age is unknown for 83.8% of all records, which makes it impossible to draw conclusions about the overall distribution of the age of the victims. However, the full enumeration does include 2,165 records of victims, which includes 0 to 9 years old. So when we look at the location of killing, the three comprehensive non-governmental sources including in this report, the Syrian Center for Statistics and Research, the Syrian Network for Human Rights, and the Violations Documentation Center, all record more killings in rural Damascus than in other governorates. And the last issue is related to combatant and non-combatant status. The status of the victims as combatants or non-combatants is unknown for all, but a few records, and consequently combatant status is not assessed in this report. In addition to deaths, especially Syria's northern cities were exposed to heavy damage during this 3-year period. According to United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, about 2.5 million have fled to Syria's immediate neighborhoods, like Turkey, Lebanon, Jordan, and Iraq. 6.5. Sorry. Okay, then I'll make it quick. Okay. Okay. 6.5 million are internally displaced within Syria. Meanwhile, almost 100,000 have declared asylum in Europe, with a small number offered resettlement by countries such as Germany and Sweden. However, according to European Commission statements, a total number of those who moved to neighbor countries is 2.9 million. It's quite an understandable situation in such a humanitarian tragedy that among the numbers there are such kind of discrepancies, considering the blur of borders between Syria and especially Turkey and Iraq. So there is a graph which shows the budget or the money mobilized for Syrian crisis, and according to the Commission sources since 2011, 2.881 billion euros has been mobilized for relief and recovery assistance from EU and member countries. Okay then. So just to make a conclusion, yes. The common finding of these two cases is that it's not rhetorically quite easy to assume EU, which identifies itself as a human security provider, is practically successful. The process starting with the Arab Spring is extremely far from what EU, forming a neighborhood and peace circle encompassing Iraq, Syria, and large areas stretching from North Africa to Eastern Europe, even though it was not covered by ENP intended. According to the source of UN Refugee Agency as of September 2014, almost 3 million Syrian refugees live in various countries of the Middle East, especially in Turkey, Jordan, and Lebanon. However, it's estimated that these numbers are quite below the real ones, and thought that only in Turkey there are over 2 million Syrian refugees. And just to illustrate with statistical data, Turkey has already spent 2.5 billion TL, which only 200 million coming from other countries. And we know that over 2
I'm so sorry, please.
Okay.
This is too much. That's not human security. That's not fair.
Okay, then. Okay. So you could not do anything sound on the refugee crisis, which is the largest one ever since the Second World War. And furthermore, for Turkmen, Shia, Christian, and Yazidi people facing the threat of genocide by Islamic State attacks, there is not any constructive policy. We can say that. So, the final result of this work is that EU's rhetorical claim of providing human security is far from being in harmony with practice. So, thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much.